you're watching closely.
Every magic trick consists of 3 parts, or acts. The first part is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, a deck of cards, a bird, or a man. He shows you this object, perhaps he asks you to inspect it, to see that it is indeed real, but of course, it probably isn't. The second act is called the turn. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now, you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. Because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled. But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back. That's why every magic trick has a third act, the hardest part, the part we call the prestige.
In under 2 minutes, Christopher Nolan hands his audience all of the pieces required to solve the puzzle of the prestige. Yet, the film manages to continue for another 2 hours, never straying from this explanation, while simultaneously beguiling its viewers. The Prestige is a puzzle film, and between it and Inception, Christopher Nolan has proven himself a master of the medium, with the ability to tie his narrative games into the very format of film itself. In contrast, Charlie Kaufman is a screenwriter and a director that offers the inverse of Nolan's experiences. His films are puzzles with broken components and missing pieces. They do not add up easily, and are so introspective and self-reflexive that they often collapse in on themselves endlessly and impossibly. Contrasting these filmmakers is important because they both represent apexes in the possibility of narrative cinema. Nolan provides us with literal cinema, where everything has a solution, and every scene is a clue waiting to be uncovered.
Why can't you outthink him?
Whereas Kaufman presents us with non-literal cinema. Themes and motifs become symbols, metaphors, and concepts that resist being logically unpicked. This essay will explore the structure of Inception and Synecdoche in New York by using the explanation of a magic trick as outlined in The Prestige, and how this also reflects a basic 3-act structure of narrative outlined by David Bordwell. Doing so will reveal their similarities, their differences, and the way they portray dreams in relation to Baudrillard's theory of the simulacrum. But first, we need to understand the basic plots of both films. To me, Inception is a film about films, but its central narrative thrust is about dreams. In short, the main character, Cobb, takes an offer from a businessman to plant an idea in the mind of a rival. This is the titular Inception. To do so, they must construct dreams that allow them to fool the target into thinking that the idea being planted is their own. Along the way, the plans are disrupted by the memories of Cobb's dead wife, Mal, the person he first performed an Inception on, with fatal consequences.
One very simple idea that changed everything. That our world wasn't real. That she needed to wake up to come back to reality.
Synecdoche in New York is also about films and dreams, but in a different way. It concerns a self-obsessed hypochondriac playwright named Caden Cotard who loses his wife and child through his own infidelity and self-obsession. Soon after, he receives a Genius grant allowing him to create any piece of theatre he chooses to. As he abandons himself to his own ego and the fantasies of control, he also creates an impossible play that attempts to subsume the entire scope of life within it, which soon spirals wildly out of control, making the borders between the theatre dream space and reality nearly impossible to pass.
I don't like the guy you got to play you.
You don't like Sammy? Why? I think he's good.
I think you should fire. Fuck you.
Both films deal with dreams in some way. If a film or a theatre production can be understood as a dream made real, that is, fiction, then the question of what is real within those spaces becomes key. Using Baudrillard's simulacra and simulation is one useful way of drawing up the key differences between the way these films represent the divide between reality and dreams. This is paraphrasing somewhat, but Baudrillard explains that someone who feigns an illness can simply pretend with no long-lasting consequences, but someone who simulates an illness will eventually produce some of the symptoms. The dreams in Inception do have effects to those within them.
It won't wake him up.
When we die in a dream, we wake up.
Not from this. We're too heavily sedated to wake up that way.
Right, so what happens when we die?
But ultimately they can be solved and worked around and awoken from if dangers arise. In Synecdoche, New York, however, Caden Cotard lives his dream. The difference between true and false thus becomes unclear and the puzzle becomes harder to unpick.
Sammy! Sammy! Sammy!
Okay.
What are you doing?
The three-act structure of narrative cinema as highlighted by David Bordwell in The Way Hollywood Tells It ties into these ideas of reality and dreams by working on accepted notions for more complex narrative ends. The pledge is the inciting act, the setup and the characterizations that get the viewer on board with the narrative. In Inception, the pledge is the rules of the dream and how they relate to film logic. We are shown early on that the typical cuts in Hollywood editing style that skip from one place to another operate analogous to the inexplicable motion we find in dreams.
Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
So how did we end up here?
We also learn that totems are a tool to figure out if a character is still dreaming, which becomes important to unpicking the plot. In Synecdoche, the pledge is Caden's very normal life and his sicknesses. However, the film upsets these ideas early on, with a continuous presence of Sammy Barnathan, who becomes Caden's understudy later on, and the constant slipping of time through the first half of the film. In the language of The Prestige, the turn is the part of the film where the normal is made extraordinary. Bordwell marks it out as the part of the film that is full of complications and crises that culminate in a dark or static moment. Inception's turn is the climax of the film, the band flipping over and the layers of the dream deepening towards limbo. It is represented as a knowing understanding of how film works, with Cameron and Misek explaining how the metaphor of layers evokes the interface of popular media production applications such as Photoshop, After Effects, and Final Cut Pro. If we could see through the artifice of the film, we would be able to witness the layers of editing and colour grading that serve to delineate the dream worlds from each other. And it also allows us to find the darkest or deepest moment of the narrative, specifically Limbo, where Cobb and Mal have their final conflict. The layers of Synecdoche, however, are not as easy to understand. The warehouses of the play nest within each other matryoshka-like, suggesting the possibility of infinite stages within stages. The term mise en abîme is used for this concept, and it accurately reflects the vast level of introspection that Caden is attempting, and speaks of the inextricable solution it so tantalisingly dangles just out of reach. Unlike Inception's logical layers that could be seen in an editing suite, Caden's layers of reality are potentially infinite, and through the prior destabilisation of what is normal, it is almost impossible to figure out where reality begins, and where the dream play ends.
I didn't jump, Sammy! A man stopped me before I jumped! Get up!
The final piece of the puzzle is the prestige itself, but it is more complex than it first seems. It is in essence the resolution of the film and the settling of a new equilibrium, but for Inception and Synecdoche, it is where the two films most diverge. In Inception, a logical puzzle, the prestige is the end of the trick and the return of equilibrium with some minor caveats. Whereas in Synecdoche, a full simulation of reality is now in operation. Its conclusion marks the absence of a basic reality, and in the end, any relation to reality itself has broken down. It has become pure simulacrum. It is by this logic that the puzzle of Synecdoche cannot be solved. But why is this important? Ultimately, both films are complex puzzles, but they eventually lead to different outcomes. William Brown has previously talked about the fact that complex and simple are difficult terms to bring to bear on films. How much meaning can be brought out of complex techniques, and do complex techniques allow for more depth than more simple methods? It is quite obvious from a single viewing that Inception is a complex film, but its outcome is relatively simple, whereas Synecdoche is also complex, but its outcome is perhaps not so simple. The difference is their adherence to the rules and logic that I've previously explained, as well as the ultimate story that they wish to tell. Inception's story is fundamentally very simple. It is about finding meaning, and it resolves its question by providing each character with a solution. Saito wishes to compete with his rival, and he succeeds. Cobb wants to finally put his demons to bed and see his children again, and that is resolved, albeit perhaps again with some caveats. In Synecdoche though, Kaufman is on a journey to find meaning through Cotard and the infinite introspection allowed by cinema, but whereas the same techniques are applied, with layers and the language of cinema allowing for tricky narrative developments, they are eventually disrupted by the lack of a hard and fast resolution. As the film fades up to white, it is impossible to tell if anything was really achieved.
Guy?
This unique and knowing fade up to white is interesting to contrast with Inception's ending, the famous shot of the spinning top that cuts just before we see it fall, letting us know that Cobb is not dreaming. It is the final part of the trick, but only if the viewer has chosen to be fooled. The pledge of Inception is the rules of the film, and one rule specifically states that a totem must be totally unique.
I can't let you touch it, that would defeat the purpose. See, only I know the balance and the weight of this particular loaded die. That way, when you look at your totem, you know beyond a doubt that you're not in someone else's dream.
This suggests that Cobb's totem cannot be a spinning top. Instead, prevailing audience theory suggests that the wedding ring is Cobb's real totem, giving Inception a structure that, although complex and tricky, is ultimately still more fixed in the three-act structure than Synecdoche, which eschews any new equilibrium for something far more ambiguous. In the end, both films use their medium to tell stories both about cinema and the way that we use it to find meaning.
Sammy's explaining too much. Feels expository.
They create realities on top of and within other realities, but through the dismantling of the techniques used, we can see how one is feigning complexity, able to slip into normalcy at a moment's notice thanks to its rigorous logic, whilst the other is in full simulation, subsuming its own meaning and any possibility of fully unpicking its ideas within its own infinite recursions.
You see what I'm saying?
I'm singing this song, but it's about you. Whoever else is listening, it's only about you. See, there's just one story, and everyone's the star. And it goes like this.